I was 12 the first time I saw the homeless man standing at the entrance of St. Aurelia Square, wrapped in a coat too thin for winter and holding a cardboard sign with no words on it. Most homeless people I'd seen had messages: hungry, God bless, need help. But his sign was blank, like he was waiting for someone else to write his story for him. People passed him without looking. Some turned their heads sharply away, as if ignoring him took effort. Others whispered to each other, annoyed that he dared to stand near the nicer part of town, where tourists took photos of the cathedral's white stone arch. I shouldn't have been paying attention either. Mom always told me to walk fast, head down, backpack close to my chest whenever we went through the square. It wasn't unsafe, but she hated the idea of me talking to strangers, especially men who looked like him. But that morning, something felt different. I don't know if it was the way he stood, too straight for someone who had slept outside on cold concrete, or the way he looked at people, not with desperation, but with a kind of heavy disappointment, like he already knew nobody would acknowledge him. I slowed down just a little. It was enough for him to notice me. His eyes shifted, sharp and bright beneath tangled hair. A tiny nod, almost invisible. I felt a strange pull in my chest, as if someone tugged on a thread tied to my ribs. Mom didn't notice. She was too busy talking on her phone, using that tight voice she used when she was arguing with my dad but didn't want me to know. We walked past him, and before the crowd swallowed him behind us, I glanced back. He was still watching me, like he recognized me, like he expected something. I didn't see him again for 3 days, not because he wasn't there, but because Mom changed our route after a fight she had with a woman at work. She gets like that. One bad conversation, and suddenly the whole city becomes dangerous. I didn't argue. It never helped. But on the 4th day, she had to pick up groceries from the market near the cathedral, and we crossed the square again. He was there, same place, same blank sign, same stillness. Only this time, something was wrong. A group of boys from the private academy, older, maybe 16, circled around him. They weren't touching him, but they were laughing, pointing their phones at his face. One boy imitated him, pretending to shake, pretending to beg. Another flicked a coin at his feet. The coin bounced off the stone with a sharp metallic crack. People kept walking. Nobody said anything. My stomach twisted, hot and tight. Maybe it was anger, maybe fear, maybe both. I tugged on Mom's sleeve, but she shushed me, annoyed that I was interrupting her call. I watched helplessly as the boys closed in tighter around him. And he didn't react. Not with anger, not with fear, not even with sadness. He simply lifted his chin, looking at them the way someone might look at a loud bird or a broken radio. An irritation, not a threat. The boys didn't like that. They wanted him scared. They wanted him small. One boy stepped closer, sneering, and said something I couldn't hear. And then, for the first time, the homeless man opened his mouth. What came out didn't sound like any language I knew. It wasn't English. It wasn't Armenian. It wasn't anything the boys recognized either, because their laughter stopped instantly. The words were sharp and smooth at the same time, full of rhythm, as if each syllable had been chosen by someone who weighed sound like gold dust. He spoke only a few seconds, but the square changed while he did. The air felt heavier, like the world leaned in to hear him. The boys stepped back without meaning to, their expressions flipping from amused to confused to frightened. One whispered, "What did he say?" Another said, "Dude, that's creepy." They didn't stay long after that. Within moments, they stuttered, muttering to each other, trying to laugh again but failing. The homeless man lowered his head and went completely still again. Mom finally ended her call and noticed the tension in my shoulders. She asked what happened. I told her. She said I must have misunderstood. Nobody speaks Latin out loud in the middle of a public square. People barely study it anymore. You probably heard something else. But I knew what I heard. I didn't understand it, but I recognized it. Latin. I had read a book about ancient languages last year, and the sound of it stuck with me. The man had spoken it perfectly, like someone who lived centuries ago and never stopped. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking about how he looked at me, how he spoke only when they started hurting him, how the boys backed away like they sensed something larger than him, larger than themselves. And the strangest part was the feeling I couldn't shake, the feeling that he hadn't spoken to the boys, not really, that he had spoken for me, or maybe even to me. I didn't understand why, not then, but I would. Because that was the day everything in my life began to shift. And the day I realized the man everyone ignored was someone no one should have ever ignored. I didn't tell anyone at school what I saw. Kids my age loved turning everything into a joke, and I knew they wouldn't believe me anyway. They'd say I imagined it, or that the man was babbling nonsense and my brain made it sound like Latin because I read too many books. But the memory of his voice stayed with me, haunting the space behind every thought. It wasn't just the sound of the words, it was the certainty in them, the authority, the calm power that didn't belong to someone sleeping on sidewalks. By the next week, something strange started happening. I noticed him before he noticed me. Every time the crowd shifted, every time the street filled with noise and footsteps, I could feel exactly where he stood, like some invisible thread connected us. I'd look up from across the square and he'd already be watching me, nodding once, subtle but unmistakable, like he was acknowledging a secret only we shared. Mom couldn't stand it. She started walking faster whenever we passed, gripping my wrist a little too tight. "Don't look at him," she whispered once, her voice sharp. "Don't encourage him. People like that latch on if you give them attention." But I didn't think he was latching on. If anything, I felt like I was the one magnetized to him, like I was stepping into a story that had been waiting for me. On the 11th day after I first heard him speak, the rain came down in thick, gray sheets. Mom insisted we take the long route home, but traffic forced us through the square anyway. I scanned the usual spot automatically, and my breath caught. He wasn't there. His corner was empty, the stone dark with rain except for a lighter rectangle where his feet usually stood. I froze, an unexpected panic clawing its way up my throat. Mom tugged at me, annoyed. "He probably went somewhere dry," she said. "Don't start." But I couldn't move. Something felt wrong, not just different, wrong, like a missing puzzle piece that threw the whole picture into chaos. And then I saw it. His cardboard sign, lying flat on the ground, soaked and bending under the rain. But it wasn't blank anymore. Black ink, blurred by water, stretched across the soggy surface in uneven lines. I stepped toward it before Mom could stop me. The closer I got, the more the letters sharpened into something unmistakable. Latin. Not just a phrase, several sentences. My heart hammered. I knelt, ignoring the rain soaking through my jeans, and tried to read the parts that hadn't smeared. The first line was still clear. Filia vigilat. I didn't speak Latin well, just enough to recognize words, but even I knew what that meant. The girl is watching. A chill rippled up my spine. The second line was harder to read, the ink running like tears, but I made out fragments. Custodi eam, ante quam inveniat. Protect her, before they find her. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know why I needed protection. All I knew was that the man who spoke perfect Latin had written this, for me. Mom finally reached me, grabbed my arm, yanked me up so fast that the wet cardboard tore beneath my fingers. "What did I just tell you?" she whispered, unaware of the terror rising in my chest. I wanted to show her. I wanted her to see the words, to understand, but the sign was ruined, falling apart, the letters dissolving into black puddles. She dragged me home, angry the whole way, saying the man probably wrote gibberish, that I was scaring myself for nothing. But that night, long after Mom fell asleep on the couch with the TV still on, I searched those Latin words on my phone, and even with all the translations, all the possible meanings, one thing became clear. He had tried to warn me, and I had no idea why. Or from what. The next morning, I woke up with the unshakable feeling that everything in my life had already moved beyond my control. And I was right, because that was the day someone knocked on our door. Not the police, not a neighbor. A woman in a dark coat holding an envelope with my name on it. And that was the moment I realized the homeless man wasn't the beginning of the story. He was the key. And now, something, or someone, was coming to collect me. I didn't see him again until the following week, but he never left my mind for even a day. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him standing there in the cold, speaking words older than the cathedral behind him. I kept wondering why someone like him, someone who looked like he had nothing, spoke like a scholar from another century. When Mom finally had to cross St. Aurelia Square again, I practically dragged her there. She complained the whole way, but I didn't care. I needed to know if he was still there. He was, but something was different. He wasn't standing. He sat on the steps, leaning slightly to the side as if his energy had finally run out. His coat looked thinner, torn at the sleeve, and the blank cardboard sign lay beside him like he'd dropped it. I stepped closer without realizing it. Mom told me to stop, but her voice sounded far away. He lifted his head slowly, and when his eyes met mine, I felt it again, like a thread pulling at my chest, tugging me toward him. He blinked, as if trying to place me in the blur of faces that walked past him every day. Then he spoke, softly, hoarsely, in perfect Latin again. Only this time, I understood one word. My name. Or at least something that sounded like it. Aurelia. Nobody called me that, not even as a nickname, but it was my middle name, the name Grandma chose because she loved the cathedral. I froze. He couldn't have known that. Mom grabbed my wrist and yanked me back. She shouted at him, accusing him of scaring children, but he didn't defend himself. Instead, he pressed his hand to his chest and bowed his head as if apologizing, not to her, but again to me. That night, I looked up the word Aurelia in every dictionary I could find. It meant golden, but in older texts it had another meaning. Of the dawn, of beginnings, of light. I didn't know why he called me that. I didn't know how he knew. But I was beginning to understand one thing. He wasn't just a man who happened to speak an ancient language. He wasn't just someone unlucky or homeless. He was someone carrying something heavy, something he'd held for too long. 2 days later, I learned that not everyone ignored him. Some people wanted him gone, permanently. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. School had just ended, and I saw flashing lights near the cathedral. Police cars, an ambulance, a crowd forming. My heart started pounding before my brain caught up. I ran, leaving my friends calling after me. When I pushed through the crowd, I saw the boys from the private academy, the same ones who mocked him before. They weren't laughing now. One of them held an ice pack to his jaw. Another's shirt was ripped. And the homeless man, my homeless man, wasn't there. A police officer told the crowd that the boys claimed he'd attacked them, but the boys refused to look at each other when they said it. Their voices shook, not with anger, but with something I recognized instantly: fear. He said something, and then it felt like my head wasn't my head. The officer frowned. What did he say? The boys swallowed hard. Something in Latin, I think. The officer rolled his eyes, muttering something about delusions and hysteria. Another boy insisted the man looked different when he spoke, like a shadow moved behind his eyes. The officer didn't write that part down. I went home shaking, not from fear of the man, but fear for him. If the police believed the boys, they'd arrest him or force him out of the square. Maybe worse. That's when I decided to find him before they did, because I knew the boys were lying. They had gone after him again, and something had happened, something they couldn't explain without sounding insane. And deep down, I felt something else, something terrifying and exciting at the same time. Whatever the homeless man was, whoever he wasn't dangerous to me. If anything, he seemed strangely protective. I needed answers, but first, I needed to find him. Because for the first time I'd seen him, he wasn't standing in his usual place. And for the first time I'd heard him speak, I realized one truth so sharp, it made my throat close. Someone who speaks a dead language perfectly. Someone who knew my middle name without ever hearing it. Someone who people swore looked different when he spoke. Someone like that doesn't just disappear. Someone like that is either running from something or being hunted. And I didn't know which terrified me more. I didn't tell anyone what happened the next morning, not even when the strange feeling in my stomach returned before we reached the square. It wasn't fear exactly, more like the sensation you get before stepping on a moving escalator. Your body knows something is coming, even if you don't see it yet. Mom walked fast, annoyed with traffic, annoyed with your job, annoyed with everything. But I slowed down without meaning to. Because he wasn't in his usual place. The entrance to the square was empty except for a few pigeons fighting over crumbs, and for a moment I wondered if I had imagined him. Imagined the way he spoke, imagined the boys stepping back. But then I spotted him further down, near the fountain, not standing this time, but sitting on the edge of the stone, his head bent over something in his lap. I felt a pull again, the same invisible thread tugging at me. My feet moved before my thoughts caught up. Mom called my name sharply, but I didn't stop. Not until I was close enough to see what he was holding. It was the blank cardboard sign, only it wasn't blank anymore. A single line had been written across it, in narrow, elegant handwriting I had never seen before. Non omnibus loquor. The man lifted his head slowly, as if hearing my thoughts instead of my footsteps. His eyes locked on mine, and I felt heat rush into my chest. He didn't smile. He didn't greet me. He simply nodded once, like he'd been waiting for me specifically. What does that mean? I whispered. He blinked once, slowly, and then he spoke again. The same rich, ancient sound that had terrified the boys. I do not speak to everyone. My breath caught. I didn't know whether to run or to sit next to him. Mom finally reached us, furious that I had stopped. She grabbed my arm, but he didn't move. He just watched her with an expression I couldn't read. Not fear, not anger, something like recognition, or maybe disappointment. Mom pulled me toward her. "Don't talk to him," she hissed, her voice shaking more than she meant it to. "Come on." But just as she turned me around, he spoke again. "Puella," he said. "Girl." It was the only Latin word I understood without thinking. I froze. Mom froze too, though I don't think she understood the meaning. She only understood the tone. Calm, steady, certain. Like he had the right to speak to me. Mom snapped at him to stop, her voice louder than necessary, drawing glances from people walking by. But he didn't even look at her. His eyes stayed on mine, and something about the way he looked at me felt like a warning, or a request, or both. Mom dragged me away, and for the first time in years, she looked scared. Not annoyed, not frustrated. Scared. She kept looking over her shoulder as we walked, but he made no move to follow. He just watched us go until the crowd swallowed him again. All day I felt his voice echoing in my head. I do not speak to everyone. Then why me? Why a 12-year-old girl who still struggled with math homework and cried during thunderstorms? That night, curiosity kept stinging at me until it hurt. When Mom went to bed early, exhausted from everything, I pulled out my school tablet and searched the phrase he had written on the sign. The translation was the same, but older texts, the ones scanned from libraries, added something else: a note, a context, a warning. It was a sentence often used by scholars, monks, and wanderers centuries ago, people who carried knowledge they weren't supposed to share freely, people who chose who was worthy, or ready. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred, and in that moment, something inside me shifted. Maybe he wasn't just a homeless man. Maybe he wasn't homeless at all. And maybe, just maybe, I hadn't met him by accident. Because the next morning, before we reached the square, police cars blocked half the street. Mom gripped my hand until my fingers hurt, and I saw him, standing between two officers, hands behind his back, expression calm, almost bored, as if this wasn't the first time someone tried to remove him, as if he expected it, as if it didn't matter. And then, before they put him into the car, he turned his head and looked straight at me. Not at the crowd, not at the officers, at me. And said something in Latin that made the hairs on my arms rise. I didn't understand the words then, but I would. Because that was the moment everything in my life truly began, and the moment I realized he was not done with me, not even close. I didn't tell anyone what happened the next morning, mostly because I didn't know how to explain it without sounding strange. When I walked through St. Aurelius Square alone, Mom had left early for work and trusted me to get to school, I expected to see him standing in his usual place, but he wasn't there. The corner looked wrong without him, too empty, too loud. People ignored the absence the same way they ignored him when he was there. But to me, it felt like a painting missing its darkest color. I almost kept walking, but something tugged me sideways, the same strange invisible thread I'd felt the first day I saw him. I found him sitting on the steps of the cathedral instead, hunched over, his hands clasped together like he was praying or bracing himself against a memory. When he looked up at me, I froze. His eyes didn't look tired that morning. They looked focused, like he had been waiting for me. I didn't know what to say, so I just stood there, clutching the strap of my backpack and feeling like I had stepped into someone else's life. He tilted his head slightly, studying me with an intensity that should have scared me, but didn't. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he lifted a hand and motioned for me to come closer. My feet moved without asking permission from my brain. I stopped a safe distance away. Mom drilled that into me, but he noticed the hesitation and lowered his hand, as if respecting a rule he didn't need explained. When he finally spoke, it wasn't Latin. It was English, but spoken with the crisp precision of someone who learned it long before anyone in my family existed. "They should not have mocked you," he said. I blanked. Mocked me? They mocked you. He shook his head. Their cruelty is not new to me, but cruelty aimed at a child carries a different weight. I didn't understand what he meant until he added, "They mocked your fear." My throat tightened. I hadn't realized anyone noticed, especially not him. "You saw that?" I asked quietly. "I see many things," he replied. "Most people do not look long enough to see anything at all." I didn't know how to respond. I felt suddenly embarrassed, like he had peeled back something I didn't mean to show. He must have sensed that because he softened, the sharpness in his face fading like a shadow moving behind a cloud. "I will not frighten you," he said. "I speak only because you listened." He stood slowly, careful, as if he didn't want to seem threatening. Up close, he didn't smell like the street the way I expected. He smelled like old paper and rain-soaked stone, like forgotten libraries and cathedrals nobody visited anymore. A strange thought passed through my mind, that he carried centuries with him. "Why did you speak Latin?" I asked before I could stop myself. Something flickered in his expression. Not surprise, recognition, like he'd been waiting for that question. "Because it is my language," he said simply. "Not the only one I remember, but the one that remembers me." I had no idea what that meant, but it made a shiver crawl up my spine in a way that wasn't fear. He glanced toward the square. People were beginning to gather for morning errands, students hurrying to school, tourists taking photos. He lowered his voice. "There are truths in this place that should not sleep. You walk close to them without knowing." "Truths about what?" I asked. "About this city," he said. "About its old names. About the people who built it." I laughed nervously. "But the city's not that old." He looked at me as if I'd said something heartbreaking. "Child," he said softly, "this city is older than the language you dream in." Before I could ask more, he stiffened suddenly, his eyes narrowing at something behind me. His entire presence shifted, like a lion scenting danger. He whispered, "Go to school, now." "But—" "Go." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight, ancient and unarguable. I turned to see what he was looking at, but the crowd behind me looked normal. Still, my heart told me to run, so I did. I didn't look back until I reached the street across from the cathedral. When I finally glanced over my shoulder, the steps were empty. He had vanished. I didn't see him again for almost a week, but the city felt different every day after that, like something beneath it had opened one eye and was waiting for me to notice the other. And deep down, I already knew the truth. The homeless man I met wasn't homeless at all, and he wasn't from my world. Not completely. And soon, he would explain why he had chosen to speak to me, and why he had been waiting for someone like me for a very, very long time. I didn't see him for almost 2 weeks after the night at the library. 2 weeks during which I walked through the square every single day, pretending I wasn't looking for him, while my eyes scanned every face, every shadow, every alley. Winter crept in fast, tightening over the city like a cold fist. I kept imagining him asleep somewhere under a bridge, his breathing shallow, his coat too thin, his hands blue. I kept hearing his voice in my dreams, the Latin, the warnings, the strange softness he used when he spoke to me. Mom noticed how distracted I was, but she assumed it was school or puberty or whatever parents blame when they can't read their own kids. I didn't tell her because I didn't want her to pull me away from the square forever. Then, one morning, everything changed. The cathedral bells were ringing, echoing through the square, and tourists were gathering to take pictures of the first snow dusting the statues. And he was there, standing exactly where he once stood, except something was different. His hair was cut, his coat was newer, buttoned all the way up. The blank cardboard sign was gone. He was standing straight, not the rigid, heavy way he had before, but calm, purposeful, as if he decided he didn't need to hide behind stillness anymore. When he saw me, he smiled, a real smile, small, tired, but warm enough to melt something frozen inside my chest. I ran to him before I could think. "Where did you go?" My voice cracked, embarrassingly emotional, but he didn't laugh. He lowered himself slightly so he was eye level with me. "Far enough," he said softly, "to be safe. Close enough to return when you needed answers." I didn't realize I was shaking until he put a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You were right to be afraid that night," he added, "not of me, of what followed me." I wanted to ask 100 questions, but the words tangled in my throat, and then he said something that froze me completely. "Your father met with them." The world around us faded. The bells, the tourists, the crunch of snow. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. My dad? Met who? He looked past me as if watching something only he could see. The ones who used to be my colleagues, he said. The ones who decided knowledge should be controlled, not shared. The ones who chased me for leaving. My lungs tightened. Why would my dad meet them? His answer was slow, pained. Because they promised him something he wants more than he cares about consequences. My mind raced. Dad had been fighting Mom for custody, money, everything. He had been desperate, angry, secretive. But this was something else. Is he in danger? I whispered. We all are, the man said, because now they know about you. My stomach dropped. Me? Why me? His eyes softened the way they did the night he first spoke Latin in front of me. You listened, he said, because you saw me. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn notebook tied with a leather string. He placed it in my hands. It was surprisingly heavy. What is this? Everything they want, he said. Everything they fear. And everything you must protect. Why me? I repeated, barely breathing. Because, he said, with a faint, sad smile, you're the only one left who hasn't forgotten how to care. Mom called my name from across the square. Her voice was sharp, anxious. When I looked back at him, ready to beg him not to leave again, he squeezed my hand once. Vale puella. Goodbye, girl. And then, like before, he stepped into the crowd and vanished. This time, I didn't chase him. I held the notebook to my chest, its weight settling into my bones like the truth had been waiting for me my whole life. That night, I opened it. Inside were pages filled with sketches, symbols, maps, formulas, things I didn't understand but somehow felt familiar, like dreams I had forgotten. But the very first page wasn't like the others. On it was a single sentence, written in perfect, elegant Latin. A sentence I translated, slowly, carefully, my heart pounding with every word. Those who ignore the unseen will someday kneel before it. And under it, my name, my full name. Written in his handwriting. That was the moment I realized he hadn't found me by accident. He had been waiting, preparing me, and everything that followed, my father disappearing, the men in dark coats watching our building, the letters in Latin slipped under our door, the night the cathedral lights flickered out all at once, started with a homeless man everyone ignored. Everyone except me. And I know one day soon I'll see him again, when the time comes to finish what he started. Because whatever he was, whoever he was, he didn't choose me by mistake. And this story isn't over. Not even close.